Here he is. Ian, hi there.
Hello there.
In your lair. What is this place? What is this sample store?
This basically serves as a store for all duty-free samples that we retain here at Morris & Bowmore Distillers. We have samples, for example, here of pre-bottling.
I see.
Now, this is whisky that we've checked prior to it going to bottling to make sure that the quality is absolutely spot on.
So this is vatted. This is a mix of
vatted,
casks.
yeah, but not yet bottled. And then we'll maybe move on. The second set of samples we have is of the final product. Now, what this does is this allows us to maintain the consistency and make sure that at each stage of the production process that the quality is critically controlled.
And Customs and Excise oblige you to hold samples for how long?
We hold these for a minimum 2 years. Typically, we'll hold them for 3 years, or in the case of some of our more rare bottlings, we may pay the duty on these and hold these as future tasting stock samples.
Yeah, because after the 2 years, I mean, because this is a bonded cupboard.
This is a bonded cupboard,
yeah.
and you can imagine the turnover of samples is quite large.
Yeah.
So, and it's
if you want to take them out, then you'd have to pay duty on them. So once most of them, when you've finished with them, then they just go down the pan.
What we actually do is try and recycle them maybe into the process,
yeah.
actually put them into a cask, which
yeah.
we can then put into a blend. But so you can imagine that, you know, that one special cask is
yeah.
very
yeah.
hard to recreate.
Well, I'm glad that they're not going to go to waste. Look at the colour of that.
You know, we also hold samples in here
1971
of maturing inventory. This is an example of one of the whiskies which is maturing in our inventory, and we've drawn a duty-free sample just to take a look at the flavours, the bouquet, and hopefully that'll be something you'll see as a release in months or years to come.
Great. Well, let's go back to the to your lab, and we can have a wee chat there, shall we?
No bother. As well as the sample store that you've just seen, in the main laboratory, we have these drawers which hold the true gems in the Morris & Bowmore
wow.
inventory.
Single cask samples?
All single cask samples from our most aged vintages. We hold these here, and it allows us over a period of time just to monitor the way that these casks are actually maturing.
This one's from 1970. How far back do you go?
The oldest one that we currently have in our inventory is 1957. So that's the oldest cask we have from Bowmore.
All these ones are still on the wood?
Yes, these are all products that are still maturing to this day.
And when do you reckon, is there any logic to when will you issue some of them as limited bottlings?
I think probably the way that Scotch whisky companies operate has changed over the last few years. And we've gone from being production-led companies to sales and marketing-led companies. So sales and marketing will identify a gap in the market, and we will aim to fill that with a product of the highest quality. Or in some cases, we may know that one's maturing particularly well, think that it's at its optimum age, and we will then urge the sales and marketing to come up with a story to really bring out the best in that.
For a special limited edition bottling?
Exactly.
How many of these do you typically issue a year?
Typically, of the aged vintages, we'll issue one a year. This year we had the 1968 Bowmore. The previous year was the 1971 Bowmore.
Which are typically vattings of how many casks?
I think the 1968 was approximately 5 casks.
Yeah.
So
and then, of course, there was the most famous, probably, of your special editions was the famous Black Bowmore.
The famous Black Bowmore, which was a limited edition release over 3 years of about 5,800 bottles. We released 2,000 bottles in 1993, a further 2,000 in 1994, and the remaining 1,812 bottles in 1995.
And these are currently attracting how much at auction?
Approximately £1,500 sterling. I do believe that if you have the set of 3, then you can add approximately another quarter onto the value. So,
1,500 quid. And what was it retailing for when it first appeared?
When it first appeared, I think it was somewhere in the region of about £100 to £120. Not sure exactly.
A good investment. And if I'm right, here's one you prepared earlier.
Yeah, this is one of the bottles from the final edition. So this is one of the bottles that was released in 1995. And as you can see, the whiskey gives you a real idea of where the name came from just by looking at the colour of the spirit.
It's not so much black as crimson, actually. Deep sort of magenta colour.
Fantastic rich colour, and a fantastically rich palate to it as well. And what really appeals to me about the Black Bowmore is that even though it's spent such a long time in wood, that's not the dominating character. You can still taste the flavours of Bowmore in there, and that's what amazes me every day working with Bowmore.
What do you understand to be the key flavours of Bowmore?
I think Bowmore changes. Typically a younger Bowmore will be quite smoky on the palate, not perhaps as heavy as some of the southern island malts that come from Islay, but there is that typically smoky character. I do think when you get to approximately 20 to 25 years old, depending on the casks, that the smokiness begins to taper off and it reveals the flavours that lie hidden on the first nose, and you get a fruitiness coming through, some floral character coming through, you know, everything that you associate with the flora and fauna of Islay comes to the fore, and then the smokiness, which previously was the first taste you got, becomes the aftertaste. So it's an incredibly complex spirit.
That is common amongst these smoky Islas, that you get the full belt in the younger whiskey. Yeah. And then it sort of mellows out and becomes more fragrant as they get older.
Definitely.
But you must get, there are a hell of a lot of wood characteristics in here. I mean, I'm surprised that there's any. So this was made in 1964 and bottled 2000 and...
It was bottled in 1995.
In 1995. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's much distillery character left in that with the impact of the wood. And it's obviously European oak. All European oak.
All European oak. Well, I think the most important part now is to try a sample of this whiskey.
Is that your very last little drop?
This is the very last little drop.
Well, I'm very flattered.
Of the famous Black Bowmore.
I've only tasted it once, and that was in Belgium.
Now it matured.
It's very, very sherried, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's matured wholly in walnut sherry from one of the most famous bodegas of Spain.
Walnut, that's walnut brown, as in very, very sweet sherry?
Yes. And it gives it that rich, dark stickiness. But I still think that you see some of the traditional character of the aged Bowmore under there. You get a fruitiness. You know, it's an incredibly complex and well-balanced spirit.
There's a trace of treacle and rum. I think I would still identify it as a whiskey, and it's at 50%.
50% alcohol. And what I think is fantastic about this, when you taste it,
incredibly rich.
There is absolutely no burn off the alcohol. It's almost liqueur-like in the way that it slips down.
Mm. That's delicious, isn't it? Tar in the back taste. That's the Bowmore indication.
Yeah. You can still see the Islay character there. And it's not dominantly woody. You still get some of the influence of the sherry. And like I was saying earlier, I think Bowmore is a big enough whiskey really to take that age on well and build on it rather than being overpowered by heavy oak flavours. Yeah,
it's very much the wine rather than the wood. And that interesting touch, it's beautiful in the mouth, a wonderful, rich flavour with this belt of, well, I would describe it as tar rather than smoke in the just in the finish. So that 1,500 quid a bottle.
Yeah.
We're talking about £100 a glass.
About £100 a glass.
Thank you very much, Iain. I believe an important part of your job is selecting casks for bottling as a single malt.
Probably the most important function of my job is to make sure that the consistency and quality of our 3 portfolio malts, that's Auchentoshan, Bowmore and Glengarry, the quality of each one of these brands is consistent. So throughout the year we will draw samples from individual casks, different cask types, look at these, see how we're going to balance the flavour and bring these together collectively to make sure that the profile never changes. So that's probably the hardest part.
And do you work to a rigid formula? Do you know how much European against American? How many first fill, how many refill?
Obviously there is a formula there, but I think the most important thing is that you listen to your customers and you give them the product that they're going to worship and, you know, and buy basically. There is no point in creating products, you know, from pie in the sky that, you know, one week it's here, the next week it's here. I would hope that any time that anybody picks up a bottle of Auchentoshan, Bowmore or Glengarry, before they open that, they know that that's going to be of the highest quality. It's going to be as good as the last bottle they bought, and the next one will be as good as the bottle that they've just bought.
Well, that's the blender's pride. But how many casks will we've got some samples of Auchentoshan in front of us. Typically, how many casks would you require for a bottling at, let's say, 12 years old?
It can vary. I mean, obviously, whiskies at 21 years old are in limited edition releases, things like this. So it's a smaller number of casks. But with something like an Auchentoshan 12 years old, you know, you're maybe talking about 20 to 30 casks. You know, for one of the bigger brands like a Bowmore 12 or something like that, over the year you could be talking 600, 800 casks. Going
in several batches? In
several batches. We always lay down in several batches. Auchentoshan gets a minimum 6 months marrying period.
Return to wood?
Return to wood, yeah. And it just allows us, so we do it in 2 batches throughout the year. We have a first half fill and a second half fill. So at the end of the year, we'll review stock years in advance. Then we can draw samples just to make sure that next year's product keeps that same profile and just takes the brand forward, onward and upward.
And now tell me something, Iain, to what extent do you rely on your previous samples, samples from last year's bottling, the year before, 5 years ago?
I think for consistency of character, you definitely need to do these.
To have a reference sample?
I think you definitely need a reference sample. Otherwise, you can get slight changes, and slight changes may not be picked up. Now, slight changes, you think, well, that's not very much. But if you have a slight change in one batch, slight change in the next batch, slight change in the next batch, you go a year apart, and you look at these products, and they're totally different. So I think it's important.
Flavour drift or something like that.
Flavour drift. I mean, you will always get a certain amount of that, more historically than you do nowadays, and that is just down to the way that we fill our wood. We now fill our wood to a formula. We know that each year we have a consistently good supply of European and North American oak. I think if you perhaps go back to the 80s and even perhaps a couple of the years in the early 90s, basically you filled what you had available because the supply of casks was not so ready. But now I think just going forward in the future, the quality can only get better, and that's good for the consumer. To give you an example of the different flavours that you can achieve and change the profile of a spirit, these are some of the whiskies that we use to make up our Auchentoshan 12-year-old brand. The first class is Auchentoshan, which is matured entirely in the finest first fill sherry casks.
Age?
Age is about 12 years old.
Yep.
So there's no real fieriness to the spirit.
No.
And at the same time, you get the character of Auchentoshan in there, because being the lightest and the only triple distilled spirit, you have to be careful that you don't dominate it with the wood, and you still want that underlying character.
It's got a lot of wood influence there, even in the European style.
The second glass is hogsheads, which are the traditional bourbon barrels, which we've broken down, added a couple of staves to, and we put in fresh ends and we increase the capacity.
Refill or first fill? Refill.
Refill, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lovely fragrance.
It's got the woodiness, but it's got the sweetness. And then the third glass you have there is American bourbon barrels.
Cool, that's interesting.
They're all
like
Auchentoshan, but they all just have a different, say, jacket on. And then obviously we have to blend these together, marry them off, just to make sure that the quality and consistency never changes.
And if you'll draw samples from so many casks.
Yeah.
According to you will reckon that in an average bottling of 12-year-old Auchentoshan, you'll require 2 first fill sherry butts, 18 first fill hogs, and 20 first fill barrels, and 30 refill hogs, something like that. Yeah. And you'll take samples from all these casks.
Yep.
And then you'll make your trial blend.
Yeah, we do the pilot blend.
Yep. And if it's not exactly right,
then we change the ratio of casks just to make that balance perfect.
Yeah. So you'll nose individual samples.
We nose individual casks. Obviously, for larger batches where it's 200 and 300 casks, then that becomes more difficult. But we will take a representative range from each parcel that we're going to use to make sure that there is consistency within that parcel.
Yeah.
And not only that, then when we go into the bond, each and every individual cask is nosed prior to it being dumped. In case there's a bad cask or iron or any of these things that we've traditionally seen in the industry. Yeah.
Very interesting. And then, so they're all blended together and then returned to wood for how long did you say?
Approximately 6 months.
Yeah.
Just to give them that final marriage, just to balance the flavour and give you consistency of quality. And periodically throughout that, we will also monitor the quality, just to make sure that the day and hour we put that into a bottle, you get something of the highest quality. Okay, this is the most famous or the most infamous Bowmore of its generation. This is the famous 40-year-old. I don't know if you remember the story back in the late 90s. There was a bottle in Canada.
Canada, that's right.
That was taken hostage. And the thief took the bottle, but left the certificate that comes with it, and then handed a demand or ransom demand to the shopkeeper to say, you know, give me half of the retail price or the bottle gets it.
And what happened? Did he pay up?
The shopkeeper never paid up. I suspect he probably claimed his insurance, and the bottle never turned up. So I think it's probably been enjoyed during a cold Canadian
I remember
night.
that story. I mean, it put the Bowmore, the 40-year-old, right on the map.
It was probably the best publicity that we could have got for a product. You know, but if you are going to steal a bottle of whiskey, then, you know, you may as well do it with something with distinction, and I think this is a product that really...
Well, I once went into a bar in Brussels which claimed to be one of only 2 bars in the world where you could actually taste it, and I couldn't afford to taste it, of course, but apparently there was another one in America somewhere, I think, where they proudly claimed that you could taste the famous 40-year-old Bowmore. Well, when was it produced, this 40-year-old?
This was actually produced as a 40-year-old in 1995. Okay, you can see here from the certificate that this is bottle number 19 from that limited edition release.
294 owners.
Yeah.
Made in 1955. What did it retail for at that time?
I think at that time it was approximately about £1,000. I think now you're probably talking about £4,500 to £5,000.
I would think at least.
If you can lay your hands on it. Also, what's quite interesting about this certificate actually entitled all owners of the bottle to go on a trip to the famous Bowmore distillery and spend time in our cottages, and then you got to go down into the famous vaults, which are probably one of the most famous warehouses in all of the Scotch whisky industry, and you actually got to taste a sample of this. So you got to taste it without opening your own bottle.
Without opening your own. And what happens up here? Why have these? Is this just packaging?
I think that's just packaging, but what you have here is the bottle with its wax seal.
Ah, yeah.
Okay, and when that's cracked open,
You've got a
You've then
ground
got
glass stopper.
a ground glass stopper
Beautiful
to
bottle.
put into the top of it. So it's almost a teardrop. You know, when we think that's
That's
a
the
droplet of whiskey.
yes, that's right. The teardrop when you open the
Rather
bottle.
expensive drop of whiskey, but
That is
just the most unbelievable
magnificent.
presentation
Yeah.
that you can see.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Would you like to taste the sample?
Ian, I would love to. Gosh, what a...
If the last sample was £100 in it, then I suspect this is about £500 in it.
Oh, wow. Oh, you see,
A lighter character.
That is the sort of peaches and apricots and mangoes that...
that exotic fruit, mangoes, papayas, lychees.
it's like, yep, all these tropical fruits.
What this reminds me of is the summer day on the beach when the chap walks past with the tray of fruit and you smell the warm fruit.
Gosh,
Not fruit
that
that's
is
overripe,
fantastic.
it's just fruit that's at the peak of its perfection.
That is amazing. I much prefer the nose to the black Bowmore, as a matter of fact. So different.
Yeah, I mean, whiskey is something that depends on your mood. I mean, certainly the way that I drink whiskey is depending on my mood. I find that sometimes I want a smoky whiskey, sometimes I want a lighter whiskey, sometimes you want the bourbon flavours, sometimes you want the sherried flavours. And also, I think, you know, with the food you eat, because more and more we're now seeing menus which cater for Scotch whiskey.
That's fabulous. But it's all these fruits in the front of the mouth, and then a little bit of smoke, and in the aftertaste.
Yeah.
The age is apparent only just as you swallow. It's like Hessian.
Yeah.
It's not so much wood; it's sort of bung cloth.